Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Childcare Director's Chair podcast. I'm your host, Erica Sakosio, and thank you so much for tuning in today. If you are one of our loyal listeners, I have to tell you, you guys are showing up for me in the most amazing way. Yesterday, I looked on my Apple reviews and I had 10 new reviews in the last 3 days. You guys are amazing. If you are one of our listeners who listen on a regular basis, today, this is what you don't know. Today is the day you're going to write the review. So hop on over to Apple, leave us a review. Now, if you don't have Apple, that's okay. You can go on over to Spotify and you can rate the podcast. Either way, we appreciate it so much. It really does help us move up that chart, and we are coming for the top of that chart. So we need you to help us out. We know that what we're talking about is important to you, important to the children in our communities. So we've got to do that. The other thing I wanted to say is I really am excited about today's guest. And the reason I am is, well, one, Canada, you guys give us so much love. So my guest is from Canada. But the other thing I think is really important is, everybody everywhere in the news is talking about this childcare crisis. And when they're talking about, it's like kind of like doom and gloom. Well, guess what? No one is coming to save us. So we have to save ourselves. So we have to advocate. We have to use our voices. And the other part I think is so important is, what can we learn from each other? And so with that in mind, I was like, you know what? I want to see, what are they doing in Canada? What does ECE look like in Canada? What does before and after school look like in Canada? What are the differences, and what can we learn from that to help maybe solve this crisis on our own? Because it's not going to solve itself. It's going to take everybody, and the head voice of this movement has to be us. It has to be us in the field. It has to be us that know the day in and the day out what we need. How are we going to, solve this problem for, private centers, public centers, all the pieces, because no one knows it like we do. So with further ado, I would like to introduce our guest, Jamie. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here. Jamie, tell folks a little bit about yourself, other than you're from Canada. Like that was like super, like, just
that's the
Jamie
only
from Canada.
That's the only thing. I'm the only Jamie from Canada. I'm just kidding. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Wagler, and I am a supervisor and entrepreneur in Canada, specifically Ontario, specifically Stratford. If you know where that is, it's super small. I'm from a town even smaller than that, so good on you for knowing. I've worked in the field for going on 12 years. I've been a supervisor for going on 4 years. And I started my own business for ECE Consulting about 2 years ago, Miss Jamie Consulting. And then in January, I released my own podcast, The Forgotten ECE, based on before and after school educators. But my heart and soul is in childcare. And Erica, you are preaching when you say no one is here to get us out. COVID showed that. COVID proved that, no offense, no one really cares about us, and we have to fight the fight ourselves. And it's like people like you that make that easier because you advocate for early child education.
Yeah, I'm here, and I want to be that platform to help all of us raise our voices, and the great work that you do on your podcast as well. So I love to know all about what you guys are all doing in Canada and what we can learn from that. So can you just give us an overview of what maybe regulatory frameworks look like that govern ECE?
Absolutely. So right now we run, specifically in Ontario, we run off the How Does Learning Happen framework. That it's really about play-based learning, and it has 4 foundations: well-being, belonging, expression, and engagement, and how we provide that to families and our children in the community. Bigger lens, the Canadian federal government plays a role in early childhood education through funding and research. Funding, quote unquote, for those of you kids, and research, and setting some national standards. And then the provincial and territory regulations. each province kind of has their own legislation around it and regulations and guidelines, but they cover like licensing requirements for EC centers, staffing ratios, health and safety standards.
Okay, so it seems to me, in that aspect, pretty similar to what we do here. So in Rhode Island, we have the Rhode Island early learning standards, but most states have their own early learning standards. And I think it's pretty common knowledge now that play based for preschool makes sense, right? Because we're also
Absolutely.
a play based state. Research supports that and shows that that is how children learn best. So, yay, we all agree on that. As far as licensing and regulatory, that also is a little bit different based on the state. And in our country, it's quite a range. So in some states, you can have infants and toddlers, or we'll say infants 1 to 4, and then other states it's 1 to 6. Other states it's even higher. Yeah. So
What?
yeah. So what are the ratios there in Canada?
Oh my gosh. So our toddlers is, or sorry, our infants are 1 to 3. Our
Okay.
toddlers are 1 to 5. Our preschoolers are 1 to 8. Our kindergartens are 1 to 13, and our school age is 1 to 15. Now, most of our school age programs can run like together, but we have to run by the 1 to 13 ratio. We can't run 1 to 15 with kindergartens and school age mix, but 1 to 6. Did you say infants? 1 to 6
Yeah,
infants.
not in our state, but yeah, there are some states. Yeah, as you move down south, I don't know, but I don't make the rules. I'm just saying. So
Hey.
there's quite a range, and so school age is a little bit different here, slightly. So we're 1 to 13, and if you have kindergarten in the mix, it's a little bit lower. I want to say
Oh.
it's one to. I'm going to say this wrong. It'd be 1 to 12 or one to. I think it's 1 to 12. Preschool. So it looks like we're closer in preschool. We're off by 1. It's 1 to 9 instead of 1 to 8. But yeah, but some states, it's quite different.
That is, I
Quite
can't
different.
imagine having 6 infants to myself.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so well, we all know that the lower ratio, the more individualized care a child gets.
Mhm.
So one of the ways are the conversations is, and I know they're just trying to help, but some states are talking about, well, they should loosen up some regulations. I think there was even honestly on a national show, I'm not going to say the name, where this business tycoon, if you will, talks about if just by, and he does the math, by just changing the ratio by one child, what that does financially to support a center, and
Mm.
also how that could lower the price for families. So, they're kind of working out the math, but what does that do to the education piece? So those of us in education are like, well, that's all great from a business side, which we have to figure that out in our country for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to figure it out because we're definitely in a pinch right now.
Well, that's like us. Like we have the it kind of leads into it, so I hope you don't mind, but
No, go.
the
Okay.
government introduced in the last year and a bit our Canada-wide early learning for every child. Saying that wrong. It's CWELC is the acronym, but there's the push forward is good. It's the idea is that they want families to be able to afford childcare, which we know is important. That every child deserves a good start at this. That every child should be introduced to high quality education. But there's nothing backing up the staff in that. So they're pushing all these spaces and they're saying you have to open centers, you have to open centers. But when it comes down to opening centers, there's no money for it, and
Mhm.
they don't pay the educators. So now we're at this huge shortage for early childhood educators, as I'm sure that US is too. I'm sure you're feeling that in
Mhm.
Rhode Island.
Mhm.
But then we have all these families desperately looking for care. Our wait lists are incredibly long,
Yes. Yes, they
longer than
are.
they've ever been, and it's not fair. People that are opening centers or finding their care in unlicensed home childcare. Nothing against it. I'm sure some are really great, but it's not the high quality they've been promised.
Yeah. Yeah, so staffing shortage is a global concern.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is where we have to get really outside of the box, where we're reaching out to maybe other industries where there's a lot of good crossover, like
Mm-hmm.
folks who maybe are in CNA, or anybody who's like caring for people,
Yep.
right? old, young, right? Caring for people, because there's a lot of things we can teach, and there are some things we can't. You have to be the person who wants to do this and loves to do this, or you're not going to keep coming. So we have to really, I think, get creative now and think about like how do you guys market, or where are you finding your talented staff?
Yeah, we used like a platform to search for staff or to put out our
Mhm.
ads. But honestly, the best stuff I've gotten is through word of mouth. Other is hearing what we have to offer. Personally, the center that I run is super small, so we don't have the like a lot of financial backup. We don't have benefits. There's some things that the we might not have a good fight against bigger corporations for, but we have pretty good morale.
Let me ask you a question. I love that. So there's a little part of that is a big part of my platform. Let me ask you, Jamie, how small is small? What's small to you?
So we're half day preschool program. Well, we when I started, we were called a nursery school. I guess we're still licensed under a nursery school aspect.
Mhm.
So we run two half day programs, a toddler and a preschool. They run from 8 to 11:45, and then we run two PM preschools out of the same rooms, just in the afternoon. They
Mhm.
run 12:30 to 4, and then we have a before and after school program.
So how many children are enrolled in your facility total?
We're licensed for 69.
Okay.
So we're close to that, the
Yeah,
max.
yeah. So that's like to me, a mid-sized program. So my centers
Mm.
are the same. So I've got one that's licensed for 52, one that's licensed for 82, one that's licensed for 79. And I think you said a really key thing that could be one of the things that helps centers survive. When you have smaller centers, and I know, although we might not be able to fight financially like the bigger centers, we know that we keep our customers longer. We know that we can provide a different level of care, customer service that you cannot duplicate when you really start to get really, really, really big, unless you have a humongous team that's all they do. Right. So I know that, you know that. So I would say we both agree on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, oh, I'm fortunate that, and as I sure you are, that I know the families that come into for every class. I know every single one of them, and I know information about them, like how to be able to bring up conversations because we are smaller.
Hmm.
I can't imagine running a center that I wouldn't know the families, because you just build those bonds, relationships, which goes back to our framework of
Hmm.
like well-being and belonging. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I know people do it. I know that there's centers that do it, but I
Hmm.
I, I like I like people
Yeah.
smaller numbers.
Yes. So, nobody like when I scroll through Instagram or all the places, I don't see anybody talking about like downsizing. It's always like, "Oh, do you want to, up your game, the next level, open 55 centers?" No, the answer is no. I've already had 6, and the answer for me is no, because it doesn't feel good to me. And
Mm-hmm.
we all can run our own thing, but it's nice to see that someone from another country feels the same way, feels the because sometimes you're like, is there something wrong with me? Is it weird that I don't want to scale up? I don't want to scale. I've already proven to myself that I can do it from an entrepreneurial standpoint. I've already had 6 centers and they were successful. They were like everywhere else, wait lists and all of that. But it just, I think you have to go back to your why
Mm-hmm.
and be able to, again, there's some obligation there to make sure that we're not only providing good quality, but that children are learning. you know,
Absolutely.
there's an ethical part there.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
talk to me a little bit about curriculum standards. Maybe we could discuss how they might be a little bit different. So talk a little bit more about curriculum.
Of course. So, like as you mentioned too, we're play-based learning, and the curriculum comes from emergent, like what the children are interested in. That's where we grab our curriculum. Obviously, there's things that the educators will put out to kind of gauge their interest or to see if they're
Hmm.
interested in it, alongside provocations and invitations that were based on the children's interest. But even in our half day programs, like when I started, it was still not laughing. It was still theme based, but because because it's a nursery school, and they felt that that's what families wanted. But coming in, I've really pushed for it to be emergent and based on what the children are interested, because that's how they learn best. We know that that's how they learn best. They learn when they're
Hmm.
interested in the material that's being taught, and it's okay. You can still bring in literacy, you can still bring in math, you can
Hmm.
still bring in science.
You better bring in literacy.
But you can do this based on the children's interests. So that's what we run on here. Is we're working towards very emergent. It's pretty basic over. I'm gonna say over Ontario. I can't speak to all of Canada, but I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure it's pretty basic across Canada. Like emergent curriculum is what's coming through. But you also see here like Montessori and Reggio
Mm.
and those kind
Love,
of
love
curriculum.
both of those. I
Absolutely,
love both of those. A lot of respect for both of those philosophies.
absolutely.
I think that the other thing too is with emergent curriculum, and I agree with you that children learn best when that's things that they're interested in. But how do you introduce maybe topics or things that children wouldn't know that they were interested in because they've never been exposed to them?
Yeah, that's where the invitations and provocations come in that our educators bring in. So,
Okay.
for example, I'm going to use our summer camp program because that's what I know best. But
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
our summer camp programs, we still advertise them as theme based because again, that's what families want. So
Hmm.
the way we kind of work that in is that the educators will pick a theme for the week. There'll be a table in the program set up. That's the theme based table, and if children are interested in it, awesome. They'll grab those interests and they'll take with it however they go. If they're not, if they're playing with something else or showing if they're building something with blocks. So say the theme was ocean, but they're building something with blocks and it goes down like a racetrack way. Then instead of staying with the ocean, they would go down with the racetrack. But then they'd introduce things like, well, measurement, how far is this going? Or how fast is this going? And then measuring and all of those basics. So really it's about being on top of your game as an educator
Mm.
to creatively introduce the things that children might not just because they have that broad interest. It's introducing the things that kind of make up that interest.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. It's no matter what philosophy you use or method you use or materials you use, I feel like it really does come down to the educator in the room, right? You could have the best, newest materials in a room. If you don't have an intentional educator, it's useless. So, yeah, I agree with that. And we do also use themes at our program, but they are very loosely
Yeah.
used as well. So we'll bring in different materials, different things. And what I love about where we live in New England, we have seasons. We love our seasons
Oh
here.
yes.
So you know what I mean. We are all about leaves and pumpkin and spice, all those nice.
Amazing.
Yeah. So we do love that here. So that is, we always love to talk about that. But introducing other things that kids would never know or see, like a desert. Like if you never left Rhode Island, you wouldn't know what a desert looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to even as an adult, I went to Arizona back in January and I was in love. I was like, "Oh my god, like it's like a little piece of heaven," right? So also just, being making sure that your curriculum introduces kids to things not only that they're interested in, but making sure that you're introducing new things, new ideas, new concepts. So with that, let's run into are there any cultural differences that influence the approach to early childhood education in Canada? Like talk to me a little bit about culture there.
Definitely. Well, it really depends where you are in
Hmm.
Canada. But we like both U.S. and Canada are culturally diverse countries, so
Hmm.
our population is represented throughout a lot of different ethnicities and languages and cultural backgrounds. So, looking specifically at the culture and like the history of it,
Hmm.
if you're in a more rural area, it might be a little bit less cultural, and then compared to an urban area like
Hmm.
Toronto.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but we also have a really big indigenous
Oh, nice.
about obviously, and they where in the last few years they've really been incorporating that into our practices as well. So you'll find in centers here, especially like in our professional development and how to bring in different cultures into our centers, you'll find what I'm trying to say that like more appreciation for the land. And I'm not just saying that has to do with indigenous, but
Sure.
it's come from our indigenous backgrounds. Bringing in cultural aspects and learning about the individuals in our programs are huge for centers, and that we take pride in our menus and making sure that they're diverse culturally, even if we might not have representation from everywhere. There's representation to introduce children into different foods and different celebrations. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's super important to us that it's regardless of what's represented in your center through your families, that you're introducing different cultures because they're not always going to stay, like in my example, they're not always going to be in Stratford, Ontario. They're going to
Yeah.
go explore the
Can
world, and there's so
Yeah.
much more out there. So how can we bring that into our centers? And it's really, like you had said before, it's really intentional.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like so far we found that there's a lot of very similarities. So we'll talk a little bit about funding, but let me ask the question: what about men in early childhood education up in Canada? So do you see a lot of that? How do you attract them? Tell me a little bit about that.
There's such a terrible lack of men in early child education. It's so sad. Uh,
Yes.
in my career, I've maybe met a handful of men that work in ECE, or have an EC diploma. With that being said, though, I find that it really falls on the individual centers to not only like, I guess, advertise for men, like
Hmm.
encourage men to come to their centers, but also
Yeah.
be willing to fight that fight, because you still hear,
Hmm.
I have an amazing man that works for me, and the first thing
Hmm.
he asked me in the interview is, well, how are you going to deal with parents that say, like, oh, he shouldn't be changing my kid's diaper, or he
Hmm.
shouldn't do this? And I said straight up, I'm like, there's no way that's going to happen. If it happens, you don't have to worry about it. I will deal with it, because
Hmm.
you're a licensed individual, and if I'm hiring you, I trust you, just like I would trust any of my women working here.
Hmm.
So I think it's really willing to be able to fight that fight if it occurs. I can
Yeah.
honestly say it hasn't occurred. Luckily, our families are really great, but I know it has in the past, and I know
Sure.
people that it has. So
It's
it's,
a yeah, sure, it's a
yeah,
conversation, but I think it's
absolutely,
one that we also need to have, and we need to let
exactly.
those male educators know that we're their allies, and we want them here.
Yes, we
We
need
need
you.
them. So um, we have we have been very lucky. Actually, I have about 6 males that work for me, but I'm going to tell you what happens because I also in the after school space, they tend to be in the after school space. I do have one gentleman, Mr. Jacob, actually two, I guess, and Shay. So Shay works in a pre-K classroom, and Mr. Jacob will work in a pre-K classroom in the morning and then goes to after school. But he primarily is our after school staff. But I've been very lucky over my 20 some odd years. I won't say how old I am, but my 20 some odd years that because I started in the after school space, I've been very lucky to have many gentlemen apply. A lot of times I'll apply for like a sports coordinator or a van driver. I'm like, nope, you can do that, but here's also the other things that we're going to help you move along in the field. So that's really important. So let's get into a little bit about the role of government funding. So what does that look like? Because here in the U.S., I'm sure you've heard like they're pushing towards universal pre-K. It sounds like that might be similar to some of what's going on there. So talk to me a little bit. What does that funding look like? Is it a competition where you've got to apply and then only so many people get it? Kind of talk to me a little bit about that.
So CWAC, as I mentioned earlier, is the new national funding. We did have to apply for it. As far as I know, everyone that applied got it. But really, what that did was cut our fees. I think it's at 52% now, around 50%. So you couldn't go under $12 a day for the smaller centers, but the minimum is $12 a day. So what happens is families now pay $12 a day, and the government's supposed to cover the other $12 or whatever the 52% is.
So
Oh,
let me just get this right. So
okay.
providers get paid $24 a day for childcare.
Okay, this is at my small center. Yes.
Okay. So let me ask you that, like, so with that being said, I've never lived in Canada. I've never been to Canada. So I don't understand the money exchange. So what do teachers make per hour? Like, what's the range?
Okay, so they just bumped. So with this CWELC funding, they just bumped up what we have to pay educators,
Hmm.
which is only $18.50 an hour.
Okay. So 18.50 an
If
hour, but
you're
you're
if you're a RECE, you have to be
okay.
registered REC.
So do they pay the provider, like do they pay the employees directly?
No, that well, okay, that no, the centers pay the employees directly, and then they're supposed to get that money back just from parent fees that the government is surplusing.
So
Go
Maybe
ahead.
the math is not working for me.
I
So
know.
how are you, yeah, so you get $24 a day,
Per child.
$24 a day,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then you're paying the staff 18.50 an
Yep.
hour.
Yep.
And is that entry level staff?
Yeah. Yeah. As long as they've had some sort of childcare experience. Yep. And their ECE.
And so you're so with $24 you pay your rent, your electric, your
Yep.
insurance, all the things.
Hmm. And
Oh,
yeah, sure. We're supposed to be able to.
okay. All right. So it doesn't seem like there's much difference in the funding then there.
No, and like so, like a bigger center whose fees were set higher, like because they have a
Okay.
full day program. Say it was $50 a
That's what,
day.
okay, because you're a half day. That
There you
now
go.
it's
Okay.
not okay. I was missing something. I'm like,
Yeah.
there's no way.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that $24, but it's
Yes.
half a day. So it's really $50 a day,
Yeah. So like a
right?
bigger center.
Morning and afternoon. Got it. Do you guys offer wraparound care? I'm sorry, it takes me a minute. I told you I
That's
was old.
okay.
I was like, wait, this is not mathing.
No, no, no.
And do you have wraparound care like before those services, after those services?
At my center, no.
So your after school folks,
They
how is that fee structure?
they only work 3 to 6, and the families. So I should say that this funding only covers children under 6. So our after school folks and before school folks, if they're over the age of 6, their parents are paying full price, which is the only fees that we're actually in charge of now. And so they're up a little bit than they should. They're like, not that they should be, but they're up to cover the cost of other things. Well, like a family who comes before and after school for the whole month, they're looking at like $630 for the full month.
Okay. So that isn't too far from where we are in
Mm-mm.
the US. So that's pretty in line.
Yeah. So
Okay.
the funding or the Seawalk is interesting because the money is not coming as fast as it should, I guess I'll say.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of centers, especially around Toronto. I don't know if anyone's seen the news, but especially around Toronto that are closing because they can't keep up with the funding that the government's giving to surplus the missing fees from parents.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually just started a new segment here on our podcast called In the News. So that comes out every Friday. So we released our first one last week. But thank you for that tidbit because I am going to take a look
Do
at
it.
that story because again, my whole goal was to see what could we learn from each other. So, there's this big push for state funded pre-K, which is great, but we need to know like, all right, if we provide those services, will the money show up in time to be able to pay the electric, the rent, the gas, all those things, right?
Exactly.
So that's interesting to learn that there are some challenges in other countries where the money partial of the money comes
Mm.
from the government. One of the other questions I want to ask you is you had talked about parents. Tell me like how parents are involved in your program and what does that look like?
Course. So in our program, we try to because it's part of the 4 foundations of how does learning happen, our Ontario framework. Parents are involved in the programs as much as they want to be, and it's very encouraged that the parents are involved. And we know as educators that programs thrive when there's a good relationship
Mhm.
between the families and the educators, and that children do better when there's that good relationship. So we really encourage families to walk past that line, that invisible line out inside the classroom, and bring them into the room. Like, come check it out, see what's up.
Yeah.
Provide lots of documentation for them. Invite them. We just had an I Love Our Family event here in lieu of Mother's and Father's Day because there's lots of families that might not have a
Yes,
mom or a dad
we
or
get it.
grandparents. So we had I Love Our Family Day. We also hosted at the same time we hosted a clothing drive. So families were able to bring in clothing that they no longer use for their children. We set it all out and had some baked goods, and then families could walk through and take something or leave something, whatever they want to, eat some food, and then just enjoy a day of play with their kids.
That sounds awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I love involving the families as well. So before we wrap it up, because it's crazy how fast these podcasts go. Before we wrap it up, is there anything that you feel like you want us to know in the U.S.? Any words of wisdom? Anything that you want to share with us? Anything I didn't ask you?
I think that the educators in Canada, in Ontario, are phenomenal, and I think that they're doing a really good job of advocating, and we have really great programs that support us in that sense. I think just like you said, globally, early childhood educators are struggling, and I 100% agree that we have to stick together. It doesn't matter where you're from. Our goal, our framework is to better for the children, is what can we do to support the children and families, and that has to be our end goal, and how we support
It's
each
the only
other.
goal.
Exactly. And how we support each other and how we pick each other up instead of
Yeah.
competing against each other. It's
Yeah.
only going to do better if we work as a team.
Yes, yes, yes. I could not agree more. I think yesterday's podcast literally was like, why is competition good for your business?
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely is. Well, those are great words of wisdom. And I also believe that you are correct, that the Canadian educators are amazing and wonderful and plugged in. You guys come up higher than any other country that listens to my podcast. So obviously, you folks are super engaged, and that's why I reached out. So I appreciate you. Tell folks again where they can check out your podcast.
Absolutely. I'm on Spotify and Apple and anywhere that you find a podcast. And if you're looking to follow me, my Instagram is Miss Jamie underscore RECE. That's MISSJAMIE underscore RECE. And I'm always happy to chat and network. And don't get me wrong, the educators that I've met down in the US are phenomenal also.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Jamie. And for my folks that are listening, again, today is the day you are going to write a review for our podcast. Thank you so very much. And remember, it's the small details that make a big impact in the success of your childcare business. That's all for tonight. And as always, have a great day.